The Klondike Newsman by Stroller White. The newspaper for which the Stroller worked in Skagway during several months in the year 1898 was different in one respect from any other paper with which he had been connected. But the paper did have a good many hundreds of patrons who purchased it from a salesman on the street. None of these paper sellers could be classed as newsboys. They were all men of all ages and sizes and of assorted previous condition. Many of them found the business of selling papers on the streets and in the stores, saloons, gambling houses, dance halls, and other resorts a remunerative one, but this does not mean that any of them stayed with it very long. Thus, the Stroller was not surprised one morning, about the middle of May, when he was asked to interview an applicant for a job selling papers. But he was surprised when he saw the applicant. It was not a man, but a woman, a little bit of a gray-haired woman with blue eyes and an appealing smile. She gave her age as 76, the same figure would do for her weight, give or take a pound or two. She said her name was Barbara. The little creature seemed to be a little bit dismayed, and the Stroller talked to her and asked her a number of questions. Where did she come from? Why did she come to Skagway? Did she have a family or any relatives? And did they know she was in Skagway? Barbara talked quite freely once she was sure she had a sympathetic listener, and it quickly became clear that she had come to Skagway for the same reason thousands of others had come there that year. She wanted to make some money. Barbara was a widow, and all of her children were grown, and most of them had families of their own. She had been living with one of her married daughters in Butte, Montana, and a few weeks previously she had traveled out to Seattle to visit with an old friend. When the visit was nearing its end, Barbara's daughter had sent her money to return to Butte, but instead she bought a ticket to Skagway. No, neither her daughter nor anyone else knew about it. They would have stopped her had they known. All my life, she said wistfully, I've wondered what it would be like to go out among complete strangers and make my own way. I always wanted to try it and never had the chance. When the chance came, I took it, and here I am. And there she was, all 76 pounds of her, with her possessions in a worn carpet bag, only a few dollars left in her purse, and the necessity of earning a living to live on, money to live on. Would the Stroller give her a chance to sell papers? Of course he would, and he did, although he had some qualms about it. Privately, the Stroller decided that he would give Barbara a week, and then he would write to her daughter in Butte and arrange for her passage home. But the Stroller need not to have worried. Barbara began selling papers, and the first money she earned went for a place to live. She paid $2 for a piano box and made a home of it. A merchant kindly allowed her to locate her home on a vacant strip of ground next to his store. Of course, she took her meals out, but the piano box served as a place to sleep, if Barbara ever slept, which the Stroller sometimes doubted. It was not long before Barbara was selling more papers and making more money than any dozen paper sellers in town. Barbara had one sales method that was all her own, and the Stroller happened to see it demonstrated one afternoon in Jimmy Ryan's Nugget Saloon, a place much frequented by the packers and mule skinners who were hauling freight up the trail, and by the construction men who were then starting to build a White Pass Railroad. A big raw-boned fellow had just lost 7 straight times on the black and was giving vent to his feelings. He cursed the game, the dealer, the country, the climate, and several other things that came to his mind, and it was plain to see that he was no green hand at the business of expressing himself. At this molten flow poured forth, Barbara entered the place and walked directly up to the fellow. She stopped in front of him, turned those blue eyes up to his face, and with the appealing smile she said, "Would you like to buy a paper, mister?" The cursing stopped abruptly, and the fellow stood there with his mouth wide open. His face turned red. Then he shut his mouth and thrust a hairy paw into a pocket. He pulled out a silver dollar, thrust it at Barbara with a muttered, "Keep the change." He grabbed a paper and buried his face in it as though it were the most interesting thing he had ever run across. Barbara thanked him with another smile and went on to the next customer. Barbara also met all the steamers from the south, and there were a great many of them that summer, sometimes 3 or 4 in a single day, each loaded to capacity with eager gold seekers. and the capacity was a very elastic term on the steamers. The sale of papers became brisk as soon as the gangplank was in place, and here again, Barbara quickly made friends. The officers and crews on the boats soon got to know her, and they passed the word to their passengers, "Be sure to get your paper from the little old lady." By the time Barbara had been selling papers for a month, she was known to nearly everybody in Skagway, and her business was improving all the time. She made the Stroller her banker, so he knew just how much she was taking in. All of her earnings, except the cost of 3 meals a day, were turned over to him, and what he was saving for Barbara was several times more than he could manage to save for himself. Then one day in August, Barbara came to the Stroller with tears in her eyes and sorrow in her voice. An old reprobate had proposed to her that she leave her piano box and move into his cabin. He had not only proposed this, but insisted that she do so, and he was bothering her constantly. She pointed out the man, and the Stroller interviewed him and explained that if he was still in Skagway after the next steamer called for Seattle, the gang would be informed of his activities. The Stroller went even stronger. He told the old cuss to pack his kit and camp on the end of the dock until the steamer sailed. The warning was heeded, and Barbara had no further trouble. The Stroller now confesses that he was bluffing just a little when he threatened to tell the gang. But the Stroller felt sure that there were few men in Skagway, good, bad, or in between, who would not have turned out to help chastise a brute who would molest the little old lady who sold papers. And the chastisement would undoubtedly have been far more severe than the sentence imposed by the Stroller. As the days grew short and the snow line moved down the mountains, the Stroller began to have misgivings about Barbara's wintering in Skagway. At the time, he had not yet spent a winter there himself, and he imagined an Alaskan winter would be much worse than it is. So one day he had a talk with her and suggested she could well afford a trip back home and that she had earned a vacation. Moreover, he told her, selling papers during the winter would not be nearly so lucrative as during the busy months of summer. Fortunately, Barbara fell in with this idea, and the Stroller made an accounting of her money. She had $1,350, which would be approximately $27,000 in today's money, which she had saved in just 5 months. Of this total, $1,200 was exchanged for a bank draft, which was mailed to her daughter in Butte. A ticket was purchased to Seattle, and she had something over $100 left for her fare from Seattle to Butte and for incidental expenses. 3 or 4 weeks later, a letter arrived from Barbara's daughter saying that Barbara had arrived safely home and expressing appreciation for the treatment she had received. Later on, Barbara wrote to inquire whether her job would be open in the spring and to request that her piano box home not be disturbed as she hoped to return. And that was the last time the Stroller ever heard of Barbara. The Stroller went on to Dawson and would not have been in Skagway had she returned there, but she never returned. The site where she had her home in the piano box is almost directly across from the present Golden North Hotel, and the box was still there several years later when the Stroller passed through Skagway, although it has since disappeared. This is not much of a story, but it goes to show that a nice little old lady was safe in Skagway at a time when it was being called the toughest town on earth and was doing what it could to maintain that reputation. She was as safe there as she would have been in any staid, elm-shaded old eastern town where they blow out the candles and go to bed at 9 o'clock every night of the week.